Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be with you. I'm Terry Jones, and I've been speaking on disruption and innovation for over 15 years. Today, I'd like to give you a little highlight of my disruption speech. It can be normally 30 minutes in a virtual program. We're going to do about 15 minutes today. But in a physical program, it's 45 or 60 and can be mixed with other topics. So let's get started. Digital transformation, number one on the corporate to-do list before COVID. But now it's really about digital disruption. Disruption because we're in the midst of the biggest business and social disruption of our lives. And this disruption is so uneven. Walt Disney's laid off 20,000. Procter & Gamble's running 24 hours a day. Marriott had the worst quarter in history, and yet at the same time, Walmart hired 100,000 workers. So it depends on your sector exactly how you're responding to this disruption. It's critical to understand at this time that selling and buying and making have changed forever because of this pandemic. And during this time, digital transformation isn't slowing. In fact, surveys show it's actually accelerating. Disruption isn't coming. Disruption is here. And during this period, 75% of consumers changed something. Whether it's their brand or how they shopped, they're all changing. And if you're not out there telling them how you've changed to be responsive, you're going to be left out. 80% say they're going to continue with this new form of buying. Take this one technological disruption and look at the impact that it's going to have. Self-driving vehicles. Now, of course, we know it's going to upset truck driving. But what about insurance? Moving from actuarial data to actual data about you. What about parking? You're not going to park. You're going to send your car away and summon it back when you need it. Auto repair, if it's electric, it doesn't need much. Real estate redesigned, deliveries reimagined. Hotels, well, honey, let's just sleep in the car. We're almost to Vegas. We sleep on airplanes. Why not in cars? Healthcare, the number 3 reason for emergency room visits is car wrecks. They're going to go down. How about outdoor advertising, a multi-billion-dollar industry? And even traffic cops. Who are you going to arrest? Elon? All this change just from one new technology. So normally in a speech I talk about 10 or 12 new technologies. I'll mention a few in this abbreviated version. Things are moving faster today. How much faster? Well, the telephone took 75 years to reach 50 million users. Pokemon Go took 15 days. 75 years to 15 days. Why? Because of connectivity, because we're all connected. Connectivity is the basis of most technological disruption. So think about it. Because of connectivity, e-commerce sales are up 50% during COVID. Instacart hired hundreds of thousands of workers. And speaking of work from home isn't going away. Many companies say it will stay long after the pandemic. Mobile, a part of connectivity. 5G coming to make things even faster. Smart cities, broadband beamed to the home, 5G remote surgery, the Internet of Things. And if those old dial-up modems disrupted music and mapping and travel, what is 20 gigabytes going to do? Much more disruption. How about IoT, the Internet of Things? 75 billion things to be connected to the Internet by 2025. Here's an example. I've worked with Honeywell last year. They put sensors in buildings for years. The red light goes on, but you have to figure out what the red light means. So they moved from sensing to meaning, compressor failure, AC shut down in section 1. And then they moved from meaning to action, Backup on, service dispatched, from sensing to meaning to action. That's an outcome, an entirely new and much more profitable business model than just a sensor. How about extended reality, virtual reality? Well, the guy on top there is going to repair a jet engine, doing a task he hasn't done in a long time. This virtual assistant will help him find the right part to repair and use the right tool. The person on the bottom is being assisted by a coach who could be across the room or across the world. In both cases, doing things more quickly, more cheaply, more safely. And of course, what about big data? Big data is really big. 2.5 quintillion bytes a day. Where to put it? Well, the cloud. The cloud is where we're putting big data today. And the cloud is a game changer. It's why 2 guys in a startup have the computing power of a Fortune 500 company. That's a huge game changer. And it's also about instant learning from your customers. So John Deere doesn't have to wait for the annual convention to hear from the dealers what they think the farmer is doing with the tractor. They can monitor it 24/7 and update it at their will to delight the customer with new features. Now, what about AI? If big data is the oil of the 21st century, AI is the refinery. It's how we deal with big data. These are learning systems. That's the most important thing. I've had an AI company the last 4 years, and I understand that learning is the most important part of AI. Here's an example. Let's say your son gets in a car wreck. Now you're going to have that discussion with him, and hopefully he won't have the same wreck again. But if a self-driving car has a wreck, all the other self-driving cars learn how to avoid it with the next software update. Tesla has 10 billion miles of learning. It's learning 24/7 by 365. So if your company doesn't have a learning AI, it's going to be very different and difficult to catch up with your competitors. How about 3D printing, additive manufacturing? You know, GE just got the first 3D printed jet engine part approved by the Federal Aviation Administration. Think about how it was made before. A bunch of small manufacturers each made their piece, which got sent to an assembler who put it together and then stuck it in a warehouse and waited for the order, and then put it on a ship in a truck and sent it to GE. Drop in one 3D printer. That whole supply chain is gone. GE gets a part that's cheaper, lighter, faster, stronger, with no inventory. And what about all those people who participated in supply chain? The subassembler, the truck driver, the customs broker. They're not needed anymore. Isn't it better to be the disruptor than the one who's disrupted? So, look, folks, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. We have to deal with change, and more change is coming. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to deal with the new business models that underlie these new technologies? Take OPA. Other people's assets. Here's a new model. So Uber looked at the limo business and said, we don't want to own cars, licensed cars, and service cars. Drivers can find us. We'll just do these 4 things, add some amazing software, and become the biggest limo company in the world. It's not about ownership of assets anymore. Now it's about access to assets. Access to assets. Or it can be about disrupting experiences. Think of these traditional companies, and then think about how Apple disrupted Nokia, how Uber disrupted Yellow Cab, how Dollar Shave Club disrupted Gillette. Each by just changing how we buy or how we use the product. Disrupting experience can be a huge moneymaker. Now, from one perspective, these are disruptions. But from another perspective, they're innovations. It depends on where you sit. Disruption, innovation, disruption, they're just 2 sides of the same coin. You only call it a disruption because you didn't do it. If you did it, it would be an innovation, but you didn't. So let's talk about turning disruption off and turning innovation on. What's holding you back? What's holding you back from being an innovator and not being disrupted? Half of executives are dissatisfied with the state of innovation in their company. I'd encourage them to think about their attitude toward risk. Do you avoid it, reduce it, transfer it, or accept it? In the 21st century, you have to accept more risk. Now, I started my career as a receptionist in a travel agency 50 years ago. 6 months in, my manager said, let's go do a startup. And you might think that was a big risk, but really it was a small risk. I was single, I was 21, I wasn't making much money anyway. And in 5 years, we turned it into the 50th largest travel agency in the US. Later, I went to work for American Airlines and started climbing the corporate ladder from director all the way up to chief information officer. When I was CIO, I took a huge risk. I was married, I had 2 kids, a big mortgage, a big salary. I said, you know that little online thing we have? I'd like to go run that. People said, you're nuts, there are only 10 people there. I said, no, I think it could be big. And we turned it into Travelocity and took it public for $1.2 billion. Big risk, big reward. Now, since then, I've taken a lot of small risks. I'm a speaker and author. I served on 19 corporate boards. As I look back at those companies, some of them shrank, some of them blew up entirely, and the rest of them created $8 billion worth of value, and 2 of them are unicorns, billion-dollar startups. So take the first risk. Maybe you'll fail, but failure opens the door to success. We have to experiment, we have to try, and we have to make faster decisions. You know, we're all envious of Silicon Valley because they make decisions so very fast. In a corporation, though, you launch your idea out there. Marketing says that's a stupid idea. IT says we can't write the software for it. If you get through them, well, then manufacturing says we can't build it. Service says we can't fix it. And if you get past them, then they bring out the big guns, because now it's time for finance and legal, and well, it's just game over. Your idea is gone. But if you come together, you have more assets than any startup. You have the factory, the supply chain, the brand, the people. You just have to stop saying no and realize in the 21st century, your role is to get new ideas over the finish line. That's how you avoid being disrupted. And are you agile enough for this new world? Can you move as fast as these parkour jumpers? That's how fast you have to move in the 21st century. You know, a major retailer in the US had an 18-month plan pre-COVID to get to curbside delivery. When COVID came along, they did it in 2 days. 18 months to 2 days. You can't unlearn that. The boss won't forget that. You must be more agile today. And as you look at the future, don't use these new technologies to recreate the past. Reimagine what the future can be. You know, we've had radio-controlled airplanes for years. I had one as a kid. It took a 17-year-old to invent the first quadcopter. But when we rolled them out, we just recreated the past. We had crop dusters, so we created drone crop dusters. Okay, a good idea. Number one way crops are dusted in Japan. But then somebody said, what can we do for the farmer? And they put infrared into the drone, and now we can tell the farmer where his crops need more fertilizer, where it needs more water. Reimagine what the future can be. The opportunities are out there, and it won't be easy. Competition is fierce, and we're still in the midst of this pandemic. But you have the tools, so don't give up. You can do this if you realize you will succeed if you know that change is inevitable. But growth is optional. Growth is up to you.
Thanks very much. And I think I'm hearing virtual applause. Now it's time for me to disappear, and I'll be back with you in a moment for Q&A.
And here's where you can get the slides or buy a book.